Well, I think people should be very concerned about reform because they're not just a threat to individual parties, but I actually think they're a threat to democracy because they are offering easy answers.
Harriet, it's not just the Tories who have to be worried. Mr Farage is after Labour seats as well, and I think the number now was they came second in 89 seats to Labour.
But I think the shadow minister who you had on was really in denial about the situation.
Remember when Labour promised no tax increases and controlled immigration? Fast forward to today, and we're seeing a very different picture. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. Andy Burnham confidently defended Labour's immigration approach on live TV, but his words didn't match reality. We'll break down his claims, show you the facts, and let you decide if Labour's promises hold water. Labour's pre-election stance on taxes was crystal clear. No new taxes. They repeated this promise like a mantra, assuring voters that their wallets were safe. Rachel Reeves, Labour's shadow chancellor, stood before cameras and crowds, confidently declaring,
to real problems, which are not a solution and will just increase people's distrust and disillusionment, is that they show a real fall in Labour's support. If you look at the percentage change, it's not just about who's won, it's who's voting and what the percentage change is.
How worried should the party be about the threat, or the challenge, I should say, from Farage?
We have no plans for tax rises. It was a comforting message in uncertain times, one that resonated with many Britons struggling with the cost of living crisis. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. Whispers of contradictory plans began to circulate. Media leaks hinted at a kitchen sink approach to tax rises, suggesting Labour was preparing to throw everything but the kitchen sink at raising revenue. These leaks painted a picture starkly different from the public promises, raising eyebrows and questions about Labour's true intentions. Rachel Reeves's statements became a study in contrast. Before the election, she was all reassurance and no new taxes. After the election, her tone shifted. Suddenly, she was talking about difficult decisions and the need for fiscal responsibility. The transformation was jarring, leaving many to wonder what had changed between the campaign trail and the halls of power. The leaked plans mentioned a wide array of potential tax increases. Capital gains tax, inheritance tax, and even changes to pension tax relief were all on the table. Each proposal seemed to contradict Labour's earlier promises, chipping away at the trust they had built with voters. As the evidence mounted, the gap between Labour's words and actions grew wider. The tension built as more details emerged, each one adding weight to the suspicion that Labour's tax promises were more political calculation than genuine commitment. The payoff: Labour's actual tax increase plans are far more extensive than they let on. From tweaks to existing taxes to the introduction of new ones, the scope of their fiscal strategy is breathtaking. It's a far cry from the no new taxes mantra that echoed through their campaign. But taxes aren't the only area where Labour's promises seem to be unraveling. As we turn our attention to immigration, we'll see how another key pledge is facing a harsh reality check. While Labour's tax promises crumbled, another pillar of their campaign began to wobble dangerously. Remember those bold claims about controlling immigration? The numbers tell a different story, one that's costing the UK dearly. Before the election, Labour painted a rosy picture of managed migration. They promised tight border controls, efficient processing of asylum claims, and a system that would benefit Britain's economy. It was a vision of order and control, carefully crafted to ease voters' concerns about unchecked immigration. But the post-election reality has shattered that illusion. Since Labour took power, an astonishing 20,000 illegal migrants have arrived in the UK. That's enough people to fill a small town, all entering the country without proper authorization. This influx has caught the government off guard, exposing the gulf between their pre-election rhetoric and their ability to manage the situation. The strain on local communities is palpable. Take the new Asylum Hotel in Cheshire, now home to 300 migrants. Residents feel powerless and disrespected as unvetted young men are placed in their towns without consultation. It's a scene playing out across the country, with public services stretched to breaking point. But the real shock comes when we look at the potential long-term costs. A study from the University of Amsterdam suggests that the lifetime net cost of certain categories of asylum migration could exceed $20,000 per person. With 20,000 new arrivals, we're potentially looking at billions in future costs for the UK. It's a financial burden that wasn't part of Labour's campaign promises. Critics argue that the government has essentially rolled out the red carpet for unauthorized arrivals, offering incentives like free accommodation and cash allowances. This approach seems at odds with Labour's pre-election stance on immigration control. It's left many wondering, where's the coherent strategy they promised? As we dig deeper into Labour's response to these challenges, we'll see how their actions stack up against their words. The gap between promise and reality is widening, and the implications for British society are far-reaching. How will Labour explain this discrepancy? And more importantly, what does it mean for the future of immigration policy in the UK? From immigration woes to economic apocalypse, Labour's narrative keeps getting darker. But what if their worst circumstances claim is built on sand? Let's pull back the curtain on the numbers Labour doesn't want you to see. Rachel Reeves, Labour's shadow chancellor, has been painting a bleak picture of Britain's economic landscape. She's claimed that Labour has inherited the worst set of circumstances since the Second World War. It's a bold statement, one that conjures images of rationing and rubble-strewn streets. But does it hold water when we look at the cold, hard facts? Independent fact-checkers have been quick to challenge Reeves's apocalyptic vision. They point out that key economic indicators like inflation, borrowing, and unemployment are all lower than when Labour last left office. Even the national debt, that perennial political football, is lower than it was in the 1950s. It's hardly the economic wasteland Reeves would have us believe. But what about the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, that bastion of fiscal forecasting? Reeves has been quick to cite them when it suits her narrative, yet she seems to have conveniently forgotten her own words. Before the election, she confidently stated that the public finances could be assessed without needing to win an election. It's a statement that raises uncomfortable questions about Labour's sudden shock at the state of the economy. The current economic data tells a story at odds with Labour's doomsday rhetoric. The UK economy is growing, a fact that sits awkwardly alongside claims of inheriting dire economic circumstances. It's as if Labour is describing a different country altogether. Perhaps most revealing is the $20 billion figure that Reeves now cites as a surprise in her audit of public spending pressures. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies had already indicated this figure as necessary to avoid cuts to unprotected spending departments. It's a detail that makes Labour's claims of shock and dismay ring hollow. As we peel back the layers of Labour's economic narrative, a different picture emerges. It's not one of post-war devastation, but of political spin and selective memory. The gap between Labour's words and the economic reality is widening, raising serious questions about their credibility and their plans for the country's future. But the implications of Labour's actions go beyond mere economic forecasts. As we'll see, their approach to energy and climate change policy could have far-reaching consequences for every British taxpayer. And that's a story that demands our attention. Labour's grand promises are starting to look like a house of cards. Their commitments to public sector, pay raises, and ambitious climate initiatives might sound noble, but the numbers tell a different story. Let's dig into the real costs and see who's footing the bill. Labour's decision to give public sector workers a 5.5% pay rise sounds great on paper. Who doesn't want teachers and doctors to earn more? But this generous increase comes with a hefty $10 billion price tag. That's more than double the current inflation rate, raising serious questions about its impact on public finances. It's like promising a round of drinks for the whole pub without checking your wallet first. And speaking of unchecked spending, Labour's approach to union negotiations is raising eyebrows. They're siding with the most militant unions, seemingly forgetting that someone has to pay for all these promises. It's a core part of Labour's identity, sure, but at what cost to the average taxpayer? Then there's the Climate Crusade. Labour's committed to spending $11.6 billion on overseas climate aid while simultaneously vowing to decarbonise the power grid by 2030. Sounds impressive, right? But experts are sceptical. Without a clear funding plan, this goal might be as achievable as turning lead into gold. It's not just about having lofty ambitions, it's about having a realistic roadmap to get there. The potential consequences of these decisions are far-reaching. Communities across Britain could feel the squeeze as increased taxation and public spending cuts in other areas become necessary to fund these grand plans. It's a classic case of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's the average citizen who'll feel the pinch. We've seen this movie before in other countries. Take Australia, for example. Their ambitious climate policies, implemented without proper funding, led to public backlash and economic strain. It's a cautionary tale that Labour would do well to heed. As the gap between Labour's promises and actions widens, so does the strain on social cohesion and public trust. It's not just about balancing the books. It's about maintaining the fabric of our society. The question remains, can Labour deliver on their promises without breaking the bank and the public's trust? As we've seen, Labour's promises and actions are increasingly at odds. From tax hikes to immigration woes, the gap between rhetoric and reality is widening. This disconnect isn't just a matter of political missteps, it's eroding public trust and straining the very fabric of our society. The importance of holding politicians accountable has never been clearer. We've witnessed how unchecked promises can lead to unintended consequences, from financial burdens to social tensions. It's up to us, the public, to demand transparency and honest governance. But how can we make our voices heard? It's not just about casting a vote every few years. We need to actively engage in local governance, participate in public forums, and leverage social media to keep our elected officials honest. Grassroots movements and advocacy groups play a crucial role too, influencing policy and pushing for greater transparency. The path forward isn't about blind criticism or unwavering support. It's about fostering a culture of accountability where promises are made with care and kept with conviction. Only then can we bridge the gap between political rhetoric and meaningful action, ensuring a government that truly serves its people.